Hi there, Wicked Title folks. Cheryl here. And with me today is Jonathan Wilson, CEO of FinCEN Report Company. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you, Cheryl, for having me.
Now, I understand that ALTA has published an open letter to FinCEN, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And for anyone who hasn't seen the letter, I will include a link in the show notes so you can take a look. But Jonathan, what do you say we start by talking about some of the statistics that Alto was quoting? So I thought those were really interesting.
Well, they are, but even before that, the fact that Alta is writing to FinCEN is interesting all by itself. If you were the king of Alta and you thought that this lawsuit in Texas was going to make the real estate report go away forever, why would you bother to write? The
That is a
fact
good
that
point.
The fact that they're writing means that they know this isn't over, and we're going to be talking about the real estate rule with FinCEN for a little bit while longer. So
Yeah.
while they're at it, they want to make a few additional points, and I think that's what the letter gets into.
Yeah, and I think it's smart because I think they're right. I can't imagine FinCEN is just gonna walk away. They've been trying for quite some time to figure out how to pierce that veil of anonymity that comes from layered entities buying and selling real estate for a while now. So yeah, I don't think they're just gonna walk away and forget about it.
Absolutely true. But you mentioned the statistics. That's really how ALTA starts off their letter. They say, we've conducted this survey of our members, and based on the survey, we've learned all these things. For example, they say that of their members surveyed, 16% saying that the rule was causing delays frequently with closings, and 39% saying that there were occasional delays involved with closings as a result of the real estate rule. So FinCEN wants to lobby, or rather, if ALTA wants to lobby FinCEN, saying, hey, we gave it a shot, and a large percentage of our members said that this was really a pain in the butt for them.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how persuasive that is to the government. You know,
Yeah.
it's the middle of April. We're all working on our tax returns. That's a pain in the butt for 30 million, 300 million some people.
Yeah.
That's the nature of government. Things are sometimes going to be a pain. But that's the argument that Alta wants to make, that it's a burden on title companies.
Yeah, yeah. The statistics they talked about, and maybe, I don't know if it was in the letter or in the other post that they put out with the results of that research, but I also thought it was really interesting the customer resistance that was being seen, and the fact that people were actually restructuring transactions just to avoid having to report. And that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, put that in scare quotes, restructuring transactions. So I'm an investor. I'm going to buy this property in a non-finance transaction. So it's reportable. Oh, you're telling me it's reportable? I don't like that. I'll just buy it myself.
Yeah,
From FinCEN's point of view, that's entirely okay because now the
right.
land records show that Jonathan Wilson bought the property. They can hunt me down. They can find my tax returns. If they think I'm laundering money, I'm an easy guy to find. But
Yeah,
JBW LLC, that's going to be a lot harder to find. That's the whole reason why FinCEN adopted the real estate rule.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it doesn't really thwart FinCEN in some way if you are trying to launder money, but I think some of that customer resistance was probably more fear because they don't know, why is FinCEN collecting this information? What are they going to do with this information? And, probably just a broader distrust of government in general.
Yeah. And that's to say, I sort of make a little bit of sport with Alta's argument here. I don't disagree with the conclusion that
Yeah,
buyers of real property were resistant to the idea of reporting their personal information. At the FinCEN report company, when we were processing real estate reports, we saw that every time.
yeah.
Almost every transaction involved our customer support people educating the buyer of the real estate why they had to fill out all these flippin' forms.
Yeah, yeah. And, there's going to be resistance just having to fill out all that information. And, for those who are buying and selling property regularly, the fact that they have to do it repeatedly, I think is going to get real old for them real fast.
It will, but again, from the government's point of view, they
They
don't
don't care.
care.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, if I was flipping houses on a regular basis, it would really make me wish that the Corporate Transparency Act had gone through and I could have filed all that information once and then been done with it instead of every single time. So, from their perspective, I don't know that it's
Yeah.
really an
Well,
improvement.
and that's one of the things that's one of the takeaways. Be careful what you wish for,
Yes.
because small business in America wanted the Corporate Transparency Act to go away. They got it put on ice for a few years as a result of the administration regulations. But one of the consequences is now real estate rule becomes more important.
Yes. Yep.
So pick
Absolutely.
your poison.
Yeah, they're going to get what they want one way or the other. Were there any other statistics that really popped out for you, or anything that you thought was different than what you were seeing from your customers?
No, I think that Alta, said it correctly. Now, as surveys go, this is probably a little bit biased, right? Alta is asking
Sure.
title companies, "Hey, what do you think about this new government mandate that requires you to do work? Do you like it?" I can tell you what the answer is going to be, but without even
Oh, yeah.
asking their questions. But no, I think Alta, did a proper survey, and the answers that they got were consistent with what I saw as well.
Yeah. And it was consistent from what I was seeing, talking to agents and what they've been posting, in public forums as well. I do think legitimately there were a lot of challenges to implementing, and a lot of those challenges will get lesser over time. And, any
Yeah,
new system or operation is going to be challenging at the outset.
absolutely.
So, Alta went on to make a case for some changes they thought would be beneficial that FinCEN could make if they decide to rework the rule. So, what do you think about those changes? Do you think that they were good suggestions? Do you have other suggestions?
Well, and so again, I think this is the story behind the story.
Yeah,
FinCEN thinks, or excuse me, Alta believes that the real estate rule is going to come back one day. That's
yeah,
why they're writing this letter. And so they're saying in their letter, if it does come back, and we hope it doesn't, but if it does, we want to get some additional exemptions thrown in to lighten this burden that we just told you about with this
yeah,
survey results, right? So they came up with five new exemptions that they're going to ask FinCEN to add on to the real estate rule. And one is an exemption for transactions below a specific dollar threshold. They didn't suggest a number, but imagine some number that you think would make a difference. Uh,
yeah,
I understand why Alta wants to ask for these exemptions. I don't know that FinCEN's likely to grant it.
yeah.
If
Especially
you're
that first one.
yeah, if
I
you're money laundering, you might sell the property for $1, thereby
Right.
putting it below the transaction threshold, making it non-reportable, and now you've completely circumvented the rule and you're money laundering. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't stop money from actually changing hands, especially in a non-finance situation. Just because they didn't put it on any of the paperwork doesn't mean that money didn't move. So yeah, I don't know that that really accomplishes FinCEN's goals. And I don't know what data FinCEN's working with behind the scenes, but I can't imagine that there's a particular dollar threshold that money launderers are really working with. Buying lower priced properties and flipping them is a pretty good way to make a transaction look legitimate. So, I don't know that buying multi-million dollar mansions is the best way to launder money. I'm no expert in that, but doesn't seem logical to me.
yeah, and if you actually read the document that FinCEN produced when they first adopted the rule, they actually went through examples of residential real estate money laundering cases, and some
Mhm.
of them involved $50,000 properties in the
Yeah,
middle of nowhere, and there were others that were multi-million dollar condos in Long Island and South Miami. So
right.
you can launder money with lots of zeros or just a few zeros. If I'm FinCEN, I don't see a good reason to have any sort of a dollar limit on transactions for purposes of the rule.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure they'll take that one. So what's the next one that
R-
also
Right. So
suggested?
the other exemption they asked for was an exemption for a transfer from an individual seller to a non-individual entity that was controlled by that seller. So
Now that one made sense to me.
Well, it might superficially, but let's think about it.
Okay.
So Jonathan owns the property. Jonathan's going to sell it in an all cash transaction to JBW LLC. and I'm going to sign a piece of paper that says I control it. Okay.
Hmm.
Well, first of all, I have to be reporting something about my control of it. So is this a modified disclosure or just another version of the same disclosure? Okay. Well, all right, let's again, this is all for anti-money laundering. Let's say Jonathan transfers the property to JBW LLC and I fill out whatever forms to say I control it. And the next day I sell the membership interest to Cheryl Evans as part of a elaborate money laundering scheme.
Right.
I've now circumvented the rule. And it took me 30 seconds to think of that. So,
Yeah. Although you could still do that even if the transfer was reported, that still doesn't stop you from transferring the beneficial ownership of the LLC after the fact anyway. So I still think you could still circumvent FinCEN if that first transaction looked legitimate. The beneficial transaction later, they still aren't going to see that.
mhm.
Um, and I mean, title companies, when they're clearing title, if they were insuring that transaction from the seller to an LLC that they control, the title companies are already collecting documents on the LLC and who owns it, who controls it, because they have to know who's going to sign the paperwork. So them vetting that transaction for an exemption would certainly be an easy thing because they're already looking at those documents.
Yeah,
So do you think FinCEN will take that one?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. It would simplify things for a lot of investors. But again, FinCEN doesn't care.
Yeah, Vincent doesn't care. Yeah,
All right. Well, the next one on the list, I believe, was exempt transfers that are the result of a foreclosure proceeding.
exactly. So a lot of problems with this one. First, the phrase foreclosure proceeding, right? Does that mean that there was an auction on the steps of the courthouse, the way we do it in Georgia? That's a
Yeah.
type of a foreclosure proceeding. What if the bank sends a notice of foreclosure and as a workout of that loan, there is a transaction? Is that as a result of a foreclosure proceeding?
Yeah.
I fear that uh, an attempt to actually put this rule into writing would become so complicated that it would basically defeat the purpose.
Right. Yeah. Are you going to limit it only to a successful foreclosure? And that's how you define that varies by state.
Hmm.
Because yeah, foreclosure proceeding can trigger a short sale or transfer to family members. Who knows? So
Yeah, but of,
yeah,
of the hundreds of transactions that the FinCEN report company was processing before the rule was suspended, I didn't see one that was anything close to a foreclosure proceeding. So I'm not really sure that this exemption would save very many people very much time.
yeah, and I'm not sure that that would tick any box to validate that it's not money laundering. Because again, I mean, in my example of, flipping houses in order to launder money, well, buying something out of foreclosure seems to fit the bill for that. A lot of times they're distressed properties.
Except that it's if you're the cartel, you need to have a regular inventory of properties that you can push money into and out of. It's a lot harder to find those things on the steps of the courthouse. It's a little bit more public. So in their defense, I think that's the argument. But complexity would be high, and the level of benefit to the title industry would be low from this
Yeah,
sort of an additional exemption.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think it's going to rule out a whole lot of those transactions. So next on the list.
Well, so this isn't an exemption. It's more of a request that
Okay.
FinCEN wants to limit the payment information collection. And here I'm ready to say amen to ALTA.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I keep saying FinCEN wants to. What I mean is ALTA wants to, because we're talking about ALTA's letter to FinCEN. Sorry about that. ALTA wants to
Okay.
limit the amount of payment information. And here I agree with them completely. One of the
Yeah.
problems with the real estate rule is that when we get around to payment information, it's asking for the total consideration involved in the transaction. And that's not a phrase that the title industry really uses. The title industry talks about purchase price and cash to close. We
Right.
know those words. Now, it
Yeah.
turns out that when they're talking about total consideration, the way they actually made the algorithm work in their online reporting, FinCEN had in mind the sum of all the payments made by anybody, and they all need to add up to total consideration.
Right. Which is maybe not the sale price.
which it almost certainly is not the sale price, but it's also not in the regulation. That's just the way they interpreted their own regulation because the regulation never defines total consideration.
Right.
If I was the king of FinCEN, I would define total consideration in some logical way and then ask you to demonstrate how the sum of all the payments adds up to that. There you
Right.
go. And I think that by itself would introduce a lot more clarity into the process and would probably help people who had some challenges when the rule was in effect.
Yeah. Yeah. So did they specify kind of in what way that payment information should be limited, or did they leave that kind of vague?
Well, I've got the letter up here in front of me. I don't see a whole lot of specificity in the letter. They just write limit payment information to what settlement agents can realistically obtain. I don't know what that is. Uh,
I wonder if they're not thinking simply what is on the settlement sheet,
that
which,
that might be an interpretation. Yeah.
yeah, and how about can we just upload the settlement sheet and call it a day and there's all the numbers? Because I mean, total consideration, there could be money changing hands, off the books that a title agent's not going to know happen.
Hmm.
That happens plenty of times. There's kind of a little side deal to compensate for damage at settlement, from somebody moving out or what have you. But it's not in the contract, it's not on the settlement sheet, and nobody tells the title agent about it. So yeah, total consideration, that's not something you're guaranteed to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I would think that FinCEN would benefit if they would either define total consideration and tell us what it means and how to figure it out, or switch to purchase price.
Yeah.
And again, aiming for disclosures of the type of data that people can come up with. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, weren't there some challenges too with kind of validating where funds were coming from because they wanted, bank account information. And I think I remember seeing in one of the forums, somebody was asking, they were doing a transaction where it was back-to-back closings and the money was being sent from one title company to their title company. So then they're asking, well, do I report that other title company's escrow account? Do I have to trace it back to the previous transaction? I think limiting sort of some of that information as well, as far as, where is it coming from? And, I think Alta's letter also said limiting to information that was like on a check or on wire instructions. But I could certainly see buyers and sellers being hesitant to offer up, bank account names and account numbers and things like that. So there may be a variety of ways that payment information could be limited without tying FinCEN's hands in a way that's
Yeah,
useless to
it's
them.
definitely fair to say that when it comes to the collection of the payment information, that was one of the most difficult aspects of the real estate rule, both
Yeah,
in terms of explaining it to the buyers as to why we were asking for this very detailed, granular, confidential information, and then applying the real world of conducting a closing against the rather gauzy and inexact language that was used by FinCEN in the regulation. All of
yeah,
that could have
yeah,
been improved by better coordination of the FinCEN drafters of the regulation with people who had real world experience in conducting closings.
yeah, absolutely. So a lot of room for improvement there. And the last one on the list, I believe, is eliminate the collection of seller or transferor information.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why ALTA is asking for that. In our experience at the FinCEN report company, when we were processing these transactions, this was actually the easiest information to get.
Yeah, because
Um,
that was pretty basic. Name, address, it was the kind of thing that you already have in your file, right?
Yeah, you would have it in your file. It would be on the face of the settlement statement. It would be in the purchase agreement. Sometimes you have to say, "Oh, wait a minute, is that JBW LLC or is it JBW, comma LLC?" We were
Right.
clarifying those kinds of details, but I don't really understand why this request was worth making.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, maybe some limited benefits to their wish list. Do you have some other things that you think they should be asking for?
No, I think the Alta letter definitely covers the waterfront and then some. My
Yeah.
criticism is that they probably asked for some things they're not likely to get, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Remember, Alta has
Yeah.
many audiences. They want to persuade FinCEN, but they also want to demonstrate to their members that they're adding value. So it doesn't
Yeah.
hurt to fight the good fight, even if you're not sure you're going to win that good fight, and that's okay. Um,
Absolutely. And I mean, the art of negotiation, you should always ask for more than what you actually want or expect so that there's negotiating room. So, it is good
that's
to
true.
ask above and beyond because you're
But
never going to get it all.
yeah, my bottom line, though, is that the ALTA letter, again, which was made in public so that all of their members could see it, says if the real estate rule comes back into effect, give us 90 days heads up so that we can get
Yeah.
our systems back up and running.
That was
That,
my favorite part.
yeah,
Yeah.
that tells me that ALTA is anticipating a future in which the real estate rule comes back in some form or fashion. We don't know
Yeah.
if it will be in a month or 6 months or a year, but ALTA thinks that it is at least likely, has the potential to come back again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was probably one of their best asks, is that it not be brought back in a way that is implemented immediately. Because yeah, it's going to take some time. And they asked for some specifics around um, kind of defining that 90-day window as the signing of the purchase contract, which is a very clear date, as opposed to basing that on settlement date, which can fluctuate. So I think they did a good job there of really defining that in clear terms that really won't oscillate.
Hmm.
So
All
yeah,
true.
yep, it'll be interesting to see where it goes, but it's good. Alta's advocating. I'm sure Alta advocacy event will probably have a lot to say about FinCEN as well. So it'd be really interesting to kind of see what comes out of advocacy as well.
I'm sure they will. And I know we've talked about this before, but there's some time passing in which the Treasury Department has time to file their notice of appeal in the Flowers title case. I might have said somewhere else that it was 30 days. It's actually 60 days that the federal government has in which to file the notice of appeal. So that deadline runs somewhere into the middle of May.
Yeah,
So here we are in the middle of April. It's going to be a few more weeks before we know for certain what's going to happen next.
yeah, yep. The clock is ticking, but they still have a bit of time. So, we're just going to have to keep our eyes and ears open and come back and talk some more when the next development happens.
I think that's right, Cheryl.
All right, Jonathan. Well, thank you so much for talking me through all this today. And you are still processing both the verification of whether or not something needs to have a FinCEN report, and you are still filing some reports with FinCEN. Is that correct?
We are. I mean, we're upfront with everybody that, as FinCEN says, the rule is not in effect today. You do not have a legal obligation to file a report. But what we found is that some title agencies had, spent the effort to build the process. Um, they wanted to continue processing, and we're still filing reports to this day. Not many, but some.
Yeah.
And if and if
Yeah.
and if the title companies want to do that, that's okay. FinCEN is still accepting those reports.
Yeah, which I also think is interesting, that they're still accepting them. But for anyone who wants to kind of keep their process going in anticipation that they're going to need it in the future, you guys can find Jonathan at fincenreport.com. And
That's right.
thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Cheryl.